My name is Jacob Blake. I'm 30 years old and live alone in an old house in Sacramento, California, where I was born and raised. My life isn't glamorous by any means. I work as an insurance agent, spending my days typing away at a keyboard, calculating risks for contracts that no one really cares about. But if you ask me about my family or the years gone by, I'll tell you a story I never imagined I'd have to live through. It all began with differences, with the small cracks in a family I once thought was the safest haven. I'm the eldest child in my middle-class family. My parents are Martin Blake and Janet Blake. My father, a tall man with a booming voice, always took pride in his social connections. He loved wearing expensive suits, though I sometimes wondered if he could actually afford them. My mother, Janet, was fond of lavish parties, designer handbags, and photo sessions to post on social media, showing off her perfect life to friends. Then there's my younger brother, Luke, 5 years my junior, who seems to have inherited all of our parents' flair. He always showed up with new cars, the latest smartphones, and a confident smile as if the whole world was in his grasp. And me? I'm different from them. I've always preferred simplicity. An old t-shirt, a pair of worn-out shoes, and a cup of black coffee in the morning are enough to make me content. I don't understand why someone would spend hundreds of dollars on a meal just to take pictures or buy an expensive car when the old one still runs fine. Maybe that's why, in my family's eyes, I've always been the odd one out. They never said it outright, but their glances, their half-joking remarks, and the way they treated me said it all. I still vividly remember our family gatherings in the spacious living room of our old house. These were occasions like birthdays, Thanksgiving, or just random weekend evenings when my parents wanted to show off to the neighbors. The dining table would be laden with delicious food, wine glasses sparkling, and laughter filling the air. But even though I was right there, I always felt like I didn't belong. My father would talk about the big deals he was about to close, though I knew most of it was exaggeration. My mother would brag about her new necklace or an upcoming vacation. Luke would excitedly share stories about his wealthy friends and all-night parties in the city center. And me? I'd sit quietly, eating a slice of cold cuts, trying not to spill my water when someone accidentally bumped my chair. "Jacob, why are you always so quiet?" Luke once asked, his tone half teasing but his eyes full of mockery. "Or are you busy calculating how much you've saved by not buying expensive wine?" The whole table burst into laughter. My mother looked at me with a faint smile but said nothing. My father patted Luke on the shoulder as if his comment was some kind of triumph. I forced an awkward smile, swallowing the sting in my chest. I wasn't angry with them, at least not then. I just thought maybe I didn't fit into their way of life. Maybe I was too different. But that difference didn't stop at their teasing remarks. It seeped into every corner of our family life. When I graduated college with a finance degree, I chose to work for a small, stable insurance company with a decent salary. Meanwhile, Luke dropped out of college to chase his dreams, which in reality meant starting a business with money borrowed from our parents. His company failed in less than a year, but our parents didn't blame him. Instead, they looked at me, sighed, and said, "Jacob, if only you were as driven as your brother." Driven? I didn't understand. I went to work on time, paid my bills promptly, and never gave my parents reason to worry about money. But to them, I was still a failure, because I didn't live the way they wanted. No fancy car, no luxurious house, no parties. Just plain old Jacob living in a small apartment, saving every penny for a modest house in the future. The old family house where I live now holds all my memories. It's not big or modern, but it's warm. The wooden walls have faded with time. The floor creaks with every step. And the small backyard is overrun with weeds because I don't have time to tend to it. But I love this place. It's where I grew up, where I used to sit with my grandfather listening to his stories about his youth, about the days he worked in a lumber mill with his rough, calloused hands. He was the only one in the family who never saw me as an outsider. "Jacob," he used to say in his warm, steady voice, You don't need to be like anyone else. Live true to yourself, that's what matters. Flashiness is just a shell, but integrity is the core. I still remember those days sitting with my grandfather on the old wooden bench on the front porch. The scent of pine from the backyard mingled with the aroma of the coffee he brewed every morning. He never drank expensive coffee, just the cheap kind from the supermarket. But he always said, "Jacob, what's real is what tastes good." My grandfather, William Blake, was the simplest man I've ever known. He didn't have flashy suits like my father, boastful stories like my mother, or the arrogant confidence of Luke. But he had something I've always longed for: peace of mind. My grandfather was the only one in the family who truly understood me. While my parents and Luke mocked me for my frugality, my old t-shirts, or my absence from their lavish parties, my grandfather always looked at me with warm eyes. "Jacob," he'd say, gently patting my shoulder, "you don't need to chase after others. Live true to yourself and everything will fall into place." I didn't fully grasp what he meant, but every time he said it, I felt a surge of strength, as if he was sharing a secret I wasn't yet ready to understand. He often told me stories of his youth, working in a lumber mill, building things with his rough hands. "Money doesn't make the man, Jacob," he'd say in a low, steady voice, "but it can destroy those who don't know its value." I didn't fully understand his words, but I nodded, carefully storing each one in my memory. Once he looked at me, his eyes gleaming strangely, and said, "One day, you'll have something of your own. Don't be afraid of being left behind. You're stronger than you think." I smiled, thinking he was just encouraging me. How could I have known that those words weren't just comfort? They were a promise. He passed away 5 years ago on an autumn afternoon. I still remember that day vividly. The sky was gray with a light drizzle falling on the old house's eaves. I sat by his bedside, holding his frail hand, trying to hold back tears as he whispered, "Jacob, hold on to who you are. Don't let anyone take that from you." Those were his final words to me. Then he was gone, leaving a void in me that even now I haven't been able to fill. After his death, everything in my family changed. Just a few months later, my parents and Luke suddenly became inexplicably wealthy. They left Sacramento, abandoning the old house where I grew up, and moved to a luxurious mansion in Miami. Their social media posts were flooded with images of extravagant parties, trips to Paris, Dubai, or islands I'd only ever seen on TV. My mother showed off designer handbags. My father bragged about meetings with important people. Luke appeared with a flashy red sports car, his confident smile suggesting he'd hit the jackpot. I was never invited to Miami, not once. My mother called, her voice soft but distant. "Jacob, you like living simply, so staying in Sacramento suits you. The old house is yours, your father and I have decided." I didn't complain. The old house was where I felt safe, where my memories of my grandfather lived. I was grateful that, at the very least, I didn't have to worry about rent each month. But deep down, I couldn't help but wonder, why did they become rich so quickly? My father called it business luck, but he never shared the details. When I asked Luke, he laughed loudly and said, "You don't need to know, Jacob. Just keep living your boring life." I wasn't jealous of their wealth. Honestly, I was just sad that they seemed to have forgotten me. The calls became less frequent. Messages went unanswered. I continued living my life, going to work each day, eating simple meals in the old kitchen and sitting by the window, looking out at the weed-filled garden. But every time I saw their photos on social media, those radiant smiles, those glamorous parties, I felt a quiet ache. They were my family, but I was no longer part of them. I started to wonder about the money. Where did it come from? My grandfather wasn't wealthy, at least not from what I knew. He lived simply, never boasting. But his words, "You'll have something of your own," kept echoing in my mind like a puzzle I couldn't solve. I tried to brush it off, thinking I was imagining things. But every time I looked at the photo of my grandfather hanging on the wall, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was being hidden. Thanksgiving and Christmas used to be the times of year I looked forward to most. They were when the whole family would gather, even if I sometimes felt out of place amid my parents' and Luke's boastful stories. But at least back then I was still part of them. After they moved to Miami, everything changed. Those holidays became the loneliest days of the year for me. Every year I'd call, inviting my parents and Luke back to Sacramento for dinner, to reunite like we used to. "Mom, are you coming back for Christmas dinner this year?" I'd ask, trying to keep my voice upbeat. "Oh, Jacob, I'm so busy," she'd reply, her tone gentle but cold. "Your father has a big party in Miami. Next time, okay?" That next time never came. Luke didn't even bother responding. Once I texted him to ask if he'd come for Thanksgiving, and all I got was a cold seen notification. I was never invited to Miami. Not once. I only knew about their lives through the photos they posted on social media. Last Christmas, I sat alone in the old house in front of a small plate of turkey and a glass of cheap wine. Meanwhile, on my phone screen, I saw my parents and Luke beaming in a fancy restaurant with twinkling lights and a table overflowing with gourmet dishes. They didn't mention me. Not a text, not a call. I wondered, did they even remember I was here, alone, in the house they once called home? The loneliness didn't hit all at once. It built up slowly, like drops of water seeping through the old house's roof, gradually rotting everything. I tried not to dwell on it. I told myself they were busy, that their new life was just too different. But every time I saw their photos, their smiles, their hugs, the happy moments I wasn't part of, my heart felt like it was being squeezed. I didn't want to admit it, but I was hurt. Deeply. I started questioning whether I'd done something wrong. Was it because I was too different, too simple, that they didn't want me in their glamorous world? Was I not worthy enough to stand beside them? Those questions swirled in my mind, especially on cold Christmas nights when I sat alone by the old fireplace, listening to the wind whistle through the windows. I tried to stay in touch. I sent Christmas gifts, small things like a knitted scarf for Mom, a book for Dad, a leather wallet for Luke. But no one thanked me. No one mentioned them. I wondered if they even opened the gifts or if they were just tossed into some corner of their lavish mansion. More and more, I felt like a faint shadow in the family. I still loved them, still thought of them, but I no longer knew how to bring them closer. I just kept living quietly, waiting for the day they might remember me. But deep down, I knew that day might never come. This Christmas, the year I turned 30, was no different from the ones before. I prepared a simple meal in the old Sacramento house. A plate of turkey, some mashed potatoes, and a bottle of cheap wine I bought at the supermarket. A week earlier, I had called my mother, inviting her and my father to come for dinner. "I'll think about it, Jacob," she said, her voice soft but non-committal. Luke, as usual, didn't respond to my text. I wasn't surprised, but the sting was still there. The old house was eerily silent. I played some Christmas songs on the old speaker, trying to create a festive atmosphere. The small Christmas tree in the corner of the living room twinkled with colored lights, but it only made me feel lonelier. I sat at the dining table, staring at the 3 empty chairs around it. I imagined the family gathered together like in the old days, when my grandfather was still alive, when my mother's smile was radiant and my father spun exaggerated tales about his work. But now it was just me, alone, with fading memories. I picked up my phone and scrolled through social media. As expected, my mother had posted a new photo. She and my father stood in front of a massive Christmas tree in their Miami mansion, surrounded by carefully wrapped gifts and unfamiliar faces. Luke was there too, his arm around a stranger, a girl, his smile as radiant as if he owned the world. I stared at the photo, searching for any sign that they remembered me. There was none. Not a caption, not a message. I turned off my phone, a bitter lump rising in my throat. I stood up and walked out to the porch where my grandfather and I used to sit for hours. The frigid December wind blew through, making me shiver. I looked up at the starry sky, trying to recall his voice. "You'll have something of your own," he had said. Those words echoed in my mind now, a reminder that I wasn't entirely alone. My grandfather had always believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. Just then the doorbell rang. I startled, nearly dropping the wine glass in my hand. Who would come at this hour? It was almost 9 o'clock at night, and I wasn't expecting anyone. I walked to the door, my heart beating a little faster. Through the small glass panel, I saw a man in a postal worker's uniform holding a pale yellow envelope. I opened the door, forcing an awkward smile. "Jacob Blake?" the postal worker asked, his voice flat. "Yes, that's me," I replied, eyeing the envelope curiously. "This is for you. Please sign here." He handed me a pen and a form. I signed quickly, took the envelope, and thanked him before he turned and disappeared into the cold night. I closed the door, standing still in the hallway, the envelope in my hand. It wasn't heavy, but something about it felt significant. On the envelope, the familiar handwriting made my heart skip a beat. It was my grandfather's. I recognized it immediately, the slanted, slightly shaky but careful script. Written on the front was, "To Jacob Blake, to be opened on the Christmas of your 30th year." My breath quickened. My grandfather had passed away 5 years ago. How could there be a letter from him delivered today of all days? I sat down on the sofa, my hands trembling as I opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper folded in half, and as I unfolded it, my grandfather's voice seemed to echo in my ears. "Dear Jacob," the letter began. "If you're reading this, it means you're 30 years old, and I hope you're still the same honest man I've always been proud of. I know life can be tough and family doesn't always turn out the way you hope. But I want you to know you're never truly abandoned. I've left something for you, a trust fund, enough for you to build the life you want in your own way. Go to my lawyer, James Carter, at 245 Main Street in Sacramento. He'll guide you through claiming it. This is rightfully yours, Jacob. Don't let anyone take it from you. I love you always. Grandpa." I read the letter over and over, my heart pounding. A trust fund. He'd never mentioned anything like this. He lived so simply, never boasting about money. I always thought he had just the small house and a modest savings. But a trust fund? Could this explain why my parents and Luke suddenly became wealthy after his death? The thought flashed through my mind, sending a chill down my spine. I stood up, pacing the living room, the letter still clutched in my hand. Memories of my grandfather flooded back. The afternoons he taught me to carve wood, the times he laughed heartily when I told him about my dull days at the insurance company. He always said I had worth, that I didn't need to be like anyone else. But if he'd really left me a trust fund, why didn't I know about it? And why did my family change so drastically after he passed? I looked at the photo of my grandfather hanging on the wall. His eyes seemed to pierce through me, urging me to act. I knew what I had to do. Tomorrow I would go to James Carter's office. I needed answers. I needed the truth. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. The letter sat on the bedside table like a small flame burning quietly in my heart. I thought about the years of being left behind by my family, the lonely Christmases, the social media photos where I was absent. Did they know about this trust fund? Had they deliberately hidden it from me? The thought was both painful and infuriating. But I tried to stay calm. I needed proof. I needed to see the lawyer. The next morning I woke up early, put on a simple button-up shirt, and drove to the lawyer's office on Main Street. My mind was a whirlwind of hope and fear. I didn't know what I'd find, but I knew I couldn't keep living in the dark. When I walked into the office, a receptionist smiled and asked if I had an appointment. "I'm here to see Mr. James Carter," I said, my voice slightly shaky. "I'm Jacob Blake." She nodded and led me to a small room where a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair sat behind a desk. He stood, shook my hand, and invited me to sit. "I'm Jacob Blake," I said, pulling my grandfather's letter from my pocket. "My grandfather, William Blake, told me to come here. He mentioned a trust fund." James Carter looked at me, his eyes cold and expressionless. He took the letter, glanced over it, and set it down on the desk. "I'm afraid there's no trust fund in your name, Jacob," he said, his voice flat. "I don't know who your grandfather is, and I certainly don't have any records of this." I felt the ground give way beneath me. "That's impossible," I whispered, my voice breaking. "This is my grandfather's letter. He clearly said to come here to see you about a trust fund." Carter shrugged, offering a faint smile. "Maybe you're mistaken. Or perhaps it's a prank. I can't help you." I left the office, my head spinning. The letter was still clutched in my hand, but Carter's words cut like a knife through my heart. I almost believed I'd imagined it all, but as I got into my car and looked at my grandfather's photo on my phone, a thought struck me. My family's sudden wealth, the extravagant trips, the Miami mansion. It all started right after my grandfather's death. I knew something wasn't right, and I would find the truth no matter the cost. I drove home, my grandfather's letter still lying on the passenger seat, a constant reminder that I couldn't give up. James Carter's words echoed in my mind. "There's no trust fund in your name, Jacob." His tone was cold, unwavering, but there was something in his eyes, a fleeting avoidance that made me unable to fully trust him. I knew my grandfather. He never lied, never made empty promises. If he wrote in that letter that there was a trust fund for me, it had to exist. But if it did, why did Carter deny it? And why did my family become wealthy right after his death? The old house greeted me with its familiar silence. I sat on the sofa rereading the letter, each word carving itself into my heart. "This is rightfully yours, Jacob. Don't let anyone take it from you." I looked at my grandfather's photo on the wall, his eyes seeming to follow me, urging me to keep going. I couldn't stop here. I needed answers, no matter how painful they might be. But I didn't know where to start. I was just an ordinary insurance agent, unaccustomed to investigating or confronting people like James Carter. I felt small, helpless, like I was standing before an insurmountable wall. But then I remembered my grandfather, the man who taught me that integrity matters above all. If he believed in me enough to leave me a legacy, I had to believe in myself too. I picked up my phone and looked up James Carter. His law office looked professional on the surface, with a sleek website featuring photos of him in an expensive suit, standing in front of a bookshelf filled with files. But it didn't reassure me. If my grandfather had chosen Carter to manage the trust, why did he claim not to know him? Was he hiding something? The thought made my heart race. I needed to dig deeper, but I couldn't rely on gut feelings alone. I decided to start with what was closest. My family. Their sudden wealth haunted me. I didn't want to believe they could be involved, but I couldn't dismiss the thought. I opened my laptop and scrolled through their social media, extravagant trips, the Miami mansion, expensive possessions. I searched for a clue, anything that could explain their rapid transformation. But beyond the glamorous photos, I found nothing but an empty feeling. I sat quietly, staring out at the weed-filled garden through the window. Then an idea struck me. If the trust fund existed, there had to be records, a bank account, a contract, some kind of trace. I wasn't a financial expert, but my job at the insurance company had taught me how to read numbers and spot irregularities. I decided to start there. The next day, I called in sick to work and drove to the bank where my grandfather used to do business, a small branch in Sacramento he frequented. I wasn't sure what I'd find, but I brought his letter, hoping it would open a door. The bank was nearly empty, with only one middle-aged teller behind the counter. I approached, trying to keep my voice steady. "Hi," I said, offering an awkward smile. "I'd like to ask about my grandfather's account, William Blake. He passed away 5 years ago, but I think he might have left something. A trust fund, maybe." The teller, Sarah, according to her name tag, looked at me curiously. "Do you have any documents related to your grandfather? A death certificate or any records?" I handed her the letter. "This is all I have. He told me to go to a lawyer, but the lawyer said there's no trust fund. I just want to check if that's true." Sarah read the letter, her brow furrowing. I'm not sure how much I can help, Jacob. Old records are usually archived and I'd need legal authorization. Do you have a power of attorney? I shook my head, disappointment rising. No, just this letter. But I know my grandfather didn't lie. If you could check even a little, I'd be so grateful. Sarah sighed, but her expression softened. All right, I'll look through the system, but I can't promise anything. Wait here. I sat in the waiting area, my hands clasped tightly. Each minute felt like an hour. I imagined every scenario, that Sarah would return and say there was nothing, that I was chasing a pipe dream, that I'd have to accept my family had truly abandoned me. But then Sarah came back holding a thin file. This isn't detailed, she said cautiously, but I found an old transaction linked to William Blake. There was a trust fund set up in 2017 in your name, Jacob Blake, but... She paused, looking at me as if weighing whether to continue. But what? I asked, my heart pounding. The fund was completely withdrawn shortly after your grandfather's death. The money was transferred to another account under the name Martin Blake. My father. My blood ran cold. How much? I whispered. Sarah shook her head. I don't have an exact figure, but it was substantial. Very substantial. You'd need to see a lawyer to sort this out because I can't access more. I left the bank, my mind reeling. My father, Luke, the Miami mansion, the lavish trips. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture was agonizing. I didn't want to believe my family could do this, steal what was mine, what my grandfather had spent his life preserving for me. But the evidence was right in front of me. I resolved to dig deeper. I contacted a retired banker, Henry, who had worked with my grandfather. After a few calls and a meeting at a coffee shop, Henry confirmed what Sarah had said. I remember that trust fund, he said, his voice heavy with regret. William was meticulous. He wanted to ensure it was only for you. But after he passed, someone came with a power of attorney claiming to represent you. I didn't handle it directly, but I heard the money was transferred. I think a lawyer was involved. Carter, wasn't it? James Carter. His name surfaced again like a haunting shadow. Anger flared inside me, but I suppressed it. I needed more proof. I hired a private investigator, an old acquaintance from the insurance company, to dig deeper. 2 weeks later, he sent me a brief but shattering report. The trust fund worth $3 million set up for me had been drained just 3 months after my grandfather's death. The transactions went through James Carter with my father's and Luke's signatures. I sat in the old house, the investigator's report on the table next to my grandfather's letter. I felt betrayed, not just by my family, but by my own trust in them. I had tried to love them, tried to forgive their distance, but now I knew they hadn't just abandoned me. They had stolen what my grandfather left for me, what he had spent his life protecting. I clutched the letter, tears falling onto the paper. Grandpa, I whispered, I'm sorry. I let them take what was mine. But then I wiped my tears, stood up, and looked at his photo. I knew what I had to do. I would confront them. I would reclaim what was mine, no matter the cost. My grandfather's letter, the investigator's report, and the fragments of truth lay scattered before me like a call to action. I could no longer live in the faint shadow of my family. I couldn't let them think they could steal my grandfather's legacy without consequences. I sat at the kitchen table, opened my laptop, and booked a flight to Miami. The mere thought of confronting my parents and Luke made my heart pound. I've never been one for arguments. I always chose silence, compromise to keep the peace. But this time was different. This wasn't just about money, $3 million or any other sum. It was about trust, about what my grandfather had spent his life protecting for me, about a betrayal I never thought my family was capable of. I prepared carefully. I printed the investigator's report, copied the bank transactions, and tucked my grandfather's letter into a new envelope, as if it were a talisman. I didn't know how this confrontation would unfold, but I knew I couldn't back down. I packed a few clothes, took one last look around the old house, and whispered to my grandfather's photo, "I'll do right by you." The flight to Miami was long and stifling. I sat by the window watching clouds drift by, my mind a tangle of thoughts. I imagined every scenario, my parents apologizing, Luke ashamed, or all of them denying everything. But deep down, I knew this meeting wouldn't be easy. They had been living in luxury for 5 years, and to them I was just an outsider not worth bothering about. When the plane landed, Miami's blinding sunlight hit my face. I rented a cheap car and drove straight to my parents' mansion, an address I only knew from their social media photos. When I pulled up to the gate, I could hardly believe my eyes. The house was massive, pristine white, with Roman-style columns and a sparkling pool in the back. Tall palm trees lined the driveway, and a red sports car, undoubtedly Luke's, was parked in front of the garage. This wasn't the home of the family I knew, the ones who once lived in the creaky wooden house in Sacramento. This was a different world, one I didn't belong to. I took a deep breath, clutching the folder of documents, and pressed the doorbell. A maid opened the gate, eyeing me curiously. "I'm Jacob Blake," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm here to see my parents, Martin and Janet Blake." She led me inside. The living room was vast, with soaring ceilings and abstract paintings on the walls. The faint scent of expensive perfume hung in the air. I heard laughter from the back near the pool. The maid asked me to wait and went to fetch my parents. I stood there, feeling like a stranger in my own family's home. My mother appeared first, wearing a white silk dress, her hair pinned up, her smile as radiant as in her photos. But when she saw me, that smile faltered. "Jacob," she said, her voice tinged with surprise. "What are you doing here? Why didn't you call?" "I need to talk," I replied, keeping my tone even. "To you, Dad and Luke. It's important." My father walked in, still exuding that polished air, in a gray suit. Luke followed, wearing a designer t-shirt, glaring at me as if I'd just ruined his party. "What's so urgent, buddy?" Luke asked, his tone half mocking, half teasing. I didn't answer right away. I led them to the living room and placed the folder on the glass table in front of us. "I know about the trust fund," I said, looking straight into my father's eyes. "The one Grandpa left for me. $3 million. And I know it was drained and transferred to accounts under your and Luke's names." Silence. A heavy, suffocating silence. My mother glanced at my father, then at Luke, a flicker of panic in her eyes. My father let out a loud laugh, but it couldn't hide his tension. "What are you talking about, Jacob? A trust fund? Are you imagining things?" I pulled out my grandfather's letter and placed it on the table. "Grandpa wrote this before he died. He clearly said there was a trust fund for me and that I should see James Carter to claim it. But Carter said there was no such thing. Then I found evidence. Bank transactions, your signatures, Luke's too. They all show the money was taken." Luke laughed, but his voice trembled. "You're crazy, Jacob. You think we need your money? Look around." He gestured at the lavish room. "We're doing 100 times better than you." "Then why did you all get rich right after Grandpa died?" I asked, my voice colder than I expected. "Why didn't anyone tell me? Why was I left behind while you all live it up here?" My mother stepped forward, placing a hand on my shoulder, her voice soft but insincere. "Jacob, you've misunderstood. We only want what's best for you. You like your simple life, so we left you in Sacramento. As for the money, that's from your father's successful business." "Stop lying," I cut her off, anger flaring. "I have proof, the transactions, the signatures, even confirmation from the bank. I just want the truth. Why did you take what was mine?" My father stood, his face flushed. "You dare accuse me of stealing, Jacob? You, a lowly clerk, standing here accusing me?" His voice boomed, drowning out the Christmas music playing from the outdoor speakers. "I'm not accusing," I said, struggling to stay calm. "I just want the truth. If there's nothing shady, why does all the evidence point to Grandpa leaving me a trust fund and you blatantly taking it?" Luke stepped forward, pointing at my face. "You'd never know how to handle money, Jacob. You'd blow it in a week. We deserve it more than you. Look at you, living like a pauper in that old house. You think Grandpa wanted you to have that money?" Luke's words cut like a knife. I looked at him, my little brother, the one I used to play with in the backyard, the one who cried when he fell off his bike and I helped him home. Now he stood there mocking me as if I didn't belong in their world. I turned to my mother, hoping she'd say something, anything to ease the pain. But she just looked down, silent. "I want you to give back what's mine," I said, my voice trembling with anger and hurt. "If you don't, I'll take this to court." My father laughed, but his eyes were icy. "You'd sue your own family? You'll regret this, Jacob. If you make this public, we'll disown you. You'll lose everything, not just the money, but your family." I looked at them, my father, my mother, Luke, the three people I once loved more than anyone. But now, I saw only strangers. "I lost my family a long time ago," I said, my voice low but firm. "You abandoned me when Grandpa died. I'm not afraid of losing more." I turned and walked out of the mansion, not looking back. My father shouted something behind me, but I didn't hear it clearly. I got in the car and drove off into Miami's blinding sunlight, feeling as if a weight had been lifted, yet my heart was shattered. I knew I was stepping onto a path with no return. I would file a lawsuit even if it meant cutting ties with my family completely. As the plane took off back to Sacramento, I gazed out the window, watching the clouds fade into the distance. I thought of my grandfather, his letter, and his promise that I would have something of my own. "I'll do it, Grandpa," I whispered. "I'll take back what you left for me." Those words burned like a small flame in my heart, keeping me steady despite the lingering pain from the confrontation with my family. I had said I wasn't afraid of losing them, but as the plane soared through the clouds, I felt loneliness grip me tightly. I was preparing for a battle, not just to reclaim my grandfather's legacy, but to prove I wasn't the outcast they thought I was. Back in the old Sacramento house, I felt like I was stepping into another world. No twinkling lights, no pool, no expensive paintings. Just weathered wooden walls, creaky floors, and my grandfather's photo on the wall, a silent companion. I sat at the kitchen table, opened my laptop, and began searching for a new lawyer. I couldn't trust James Carter, who had denied the trust fund's existence. I needed someone honest, experienced, and bold enough to take on my family. People who now had the money to hire the most expensive attorneys. After hours of searching and phone calls, I connected with Nicole Appleton, a lawyer specializing in trust disputes. Her small office in downtown Sacramento wasn't flashy like Carter's, but when I called, her voice exuded confidence and sincerity. I briefly shared my story, and she agreed to meet me the next day. "Bring all the documents you have," she said. "If what you're saying is true, we have a very strong case." I arrived at Nicole's office the next morning carrying my grandfather's letter, the investigator's report, and the bank transactions. Her office was small but tidy, with shelves full of files and a law degree framed on the wall. Nicole, a woman in her 30s with neatly tied black hair, greeted me with a gentle smile. "Have a seat, Jacob," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. "Tell me everything from the beginning." I recounted it all, from my grandfather's letter, my meeting with James Carter, the discovery of the trust fund, to the confrontation with my family in Miami. I tried to keep my voice steady, but every time I mentioned my parents and Luke's betrayal, my throat tightened. Nicole listened intently, taking careful notes and nodding occasionally. When I showed her my grandfather's letter, she read each line, her brow furrowing. "This is strong evidence," she said, setting the letter down. "But we'll need more. The bank transactions show the money was moved, but to win the case, we need to prove that your father, brother, and James Carter intentionally violated their fiduciary duties. Are you ready for a long fight, Jacob?" I nodded, though a flicker of worry lingered inside me. "I don't have much money to pay for a lawyer," I admitted. "But I can't let them take what's mine. My grandfather trusted me, and I don't want to let him down." Nicole smiled, her eyes brightening. "Don't worry about the costs right now. If we win, your family will have to cover legal fees too. I believe in this case, Jacob, we'll see it through to the end. Over the next week, Nicole and I began preparing the lawsuit. She helped me file a complaint against my father, Luke, and James Carter for fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. Each step in the process made my heart race. I never imagined I'd sue my own family. The thought of facing my parents and Luke in court made my chest tighten. But then I'd look at my grandfather's photo and I knew I had no other choice. The response from my family came faster than I expected. One evening, as I ate dinner alone in the old kitchen, my phone buzzed. It was my mother. I hesitated but answered. "Jacob?" Her voice trembled, a mix of anger and panic. "What are you doing? Suing your own family? Do you want to ruin our reputation?" I took a deep breath. "Mom, I just want what Grandpa left for me. If you and Dad did nothing wrong, why are you afraid?" "You don't understand anything," she shouted. "You'll regret this, Jacob. You're tearing the family apart." I wanted to say they had torn the family apart long ago, that they had abandoned me in those lonely years. But I stayed silent, listening to her berate me for a few more minutes before she hung up. Soon after, I got a text from Luke. "You're such a traitor. Just wait. You'll lose everything." I turned off my phone, feeling both angry and hollow. They didn't apologize, didn't show remorse. They only cared about their reputation and money. Less than a week later, I discovered my family wasn't stopping at threats. On social media, my mother posted a long rant calling me ungrateful and accusing me of slandering the family for personal gain. My father called aunts, uncles, and cousins, spinning a distorted story about how I was trying to destroy the family out of jealousy for their success. A few relatives texted me, urging me to drop the lawsuit to protect the family's reputation. "Jacob, what are you doing?" My Aunt Linda wrote. "Family comes first. Don't let money tear us apart." Reading those messages felt like being stabbed over and over. But I didn't respond. I knew if I backed down now, I'd live forever in the shadow of their betrayal. I called Nicole and told her what was happening. "They're trying to shake you," she said. "Don't let them win. We have evidence and we'll fight to the end." Nicole worked tirelessly. She contacted the bank, obtained additional transaction records, and found a witness, a former employee of James Carter who had quit shortly after the trust fund was drained. The witness agreed to testify that Carter knew about the trust and deliberately concealed it. Nicole also uncovered a copy of the original trust agreement signed by my grandfather, clearly naming me as the sole beneficiary. These documents were like a light in the darkness, giving me hope that justice would be served. But the battle wasn't easy. My family hired an expensive team of Miami lawyers who began sending threatening letters, demanding I drop the lawsuit or face consequences. They emailed Nicole, accusing me of fabrication and threatening a countersuit for defamation. Every day I received messages from distant relatives and old family friends, all blaming me for destroying the family. I felt like the world was against me, but each time I looked at my grandfather's letter, I found the strength to keep going. Nicole became my anchor in those days. She wasn't just my lawyer, she was a friend, reminding me I was doing the right thing. "You're not alone, Jacob," she said during one meeting. "Your grandfather believed in you, and so do I. We'll win, but you have to stay strong." I nodded, clutching the letter tightly. I knew this fight wasn't just about money. It was about protecting my grandfather's legacy, about proving I wasn't the failure my family thought I was. I would fight to the end, even if it cost me my heart. When the first court hearing was scheduled for August, I felt like I was walking into a storm. I had never stood in a courtroom, never faced the scrutinizing gazes of a judge, a jury, or, most dauntingly, my own family. But every time I felt like giving up, I looked at my grandfather's letter, its slanted handwriting a reminder that I couldn't back down. The trial took place in a Sacramento courthouse, in a large room with polished wooden walls and stiff rows of seats. I sat beside Nicole, my hands clasped tightly to quell my nerves. Across from us were my family's legal team, 3 men in expensive suits, their eyes sharp and smiles confident. My parents and Luke sat behind them, looking more unfamiliar than ever. My mother wore an emerald silk dress, her hair pinned up, but her eyes avoided mine. My father sat ramrod straight, his face cold as stone, while Luke smirked as if I were a joke to him. Nicole placed a hand on my shoulder and whispered, "Breathe, Jacob. We're well prepared. They can't undo the truth." I nodded, but my heart pounded as the judge, a stern, middle-aged woman with piercing eyes, entered the room. She struck her gavel and the trial began. The next 3 months were a relentless battle. My family, backed by their expensive legal team, spared no effort to discredit me. They called me ungrateful, a jealous son envious of his family's success. One of their lawyers, Richard Hayes, stood before the court and declared that I had fabricated the story of the trust fund for personal gain. "Jacob Blake is a failed man," he said, his voice smooth as an actor's. Unable to accept his family's success, he concocted a far-fetched tale about a trust fund to tear them down. Each word was like a knife, but I tried to stay calm. Nicole had warned me they'd do this. "They have no evidence to refute us," she said. "Focus on the truth." And I did. I provided everything we had: my grandfather's letter, the investigator's report, the bank statements. Nicole presented each piece with clarity and unrelenting precision. She called our first witness Henry, the retired banker who had worked with my grandfather. Henry, his voice trembling with age, confirmed that my grandfather had set up a $3 million trust fund for me, and that the money was withdrawn shortly after his death. But my parents' legal team didn't back down easily. They grilled Henry, trying to confuse him, suggesting he misremembered or was mistaken. They even produced forged documents claiming the trust's funds had been legally transferred to my father before my grandfather's death. I looked at my father, hoping for a flicker of remorse, but he sat there, his gaze icy, as if I weren't his son. Meanwhile, the local media caught wind of the case. A few Sacramento newspapers ran stories about the $1 million family inheritance dispute, with sensational headlines like "Son Sues Parents Over Stolen Trust Fund." Some articles painted me as a pitiful figure, a son abandoned by his family. Others sided with my family, calling me an ungrateful child, trying to ruin their reputation. Each time I read those stories, I felt torn apart. I didn't want to be the center of attention, but I knew I couldn't stop. Nicole kept me focused. "Don't read the papers," she said. "They're just chasing clicks. We have the truth, and that's what matters." She worked tirelessly, preparing for each hearing with astonishing meticulousness. In September, she presented our key evidence, a copy of the original trust agreement from the bank signed by my grandfather, clearly naming me as the sole beneficiary. She also showed bank statements tracing the $3 million transfer to my father's and Luke's accounts, authorized by James Carter's signature. The most crucial witness was Emily, a former assistant of Carter's who had quit shortly after the trust was drained. Emily stood before the court, her voice shaky but resolute. "I saw Mr. Carter and Mr. Martin Blake sign the transfer documents," she said. "I asked Mr. Carter if it was legal since the trust was clearly in Jacob Blake's name. He told me to keep quiet, saying it was family business." The courtroom fell silent after Emily's testimony. I looked at my parents and Luke. My mother bowed her head, clutching a handkerchief. My father stared straight at the judge, but I saw his shoulders tremble. Luke, for the first time during the trial, lost his mocking smirk. His face paled as if he realized everything was crumbling. The judge, Margaret Collins, began questioning my family sharply. "Mr. Martin Blake," she said, her voice cutting, "how do you explain these transactions? If the money didn't come from the trust, where did it come from? Can you provide evidence of the legitimate source of the funds that purchased the mansion, the cars, and the lavish trips?" My father stood, his voice quivering but still trying to sound confident. "Your Honor, it was from my business. I made successful real estate investments and—" "Do you have documentation to prove that?" Judge Collins interrupted, her gaze piercing him. My father stammered, glancing at his lawyer, but Mr. Hayes only shook his head slightly. We'll provide it later," my father said, his voice fading. The judge turned to Luke. "And you, Luke Blake?" You purchased a sports car worth over $200,000 just months after your grandfather's death. How do you explain that? Luke opened his mouth, but no words came out. His face was ashen, his eyes panicked. I looked at them, my parents and my brother, and felt a mix of pain and relief. They couldn't answer. They couldn't prove anything. The truth was finally coming to light, and for the first time I felt I was nearing justice. The trial stretched into late October, each day a new challenge. My parents' legal team tried to turn the tide with vague arguments and unreliable witnesses. But Nicole never wavered. She countered every point, presented every piece of evidence, and kept me steady through the most stressful days. Some nights I couldn't sleep, lying in bed wondering if I was doing the right thing. But then I'd think of my grandfather, his letter, and I knew I couldn't stop. At the final hearing, the courtroom felt heavy, like a storm was about to break. Judge Collins looked at both sides, her eyes sharp but fair. "I have reviewed all the evidence," she said, "and I will deliver my ruling next month. But let me say this. This case is not just about money. It is about trust, responsibility, and what someone leaves for the next generation." I looked at my family. My mother was crying, but she still wouldn't meet my eyes. My father sat motionless, his gaze empty. Luke bowed his head, his hands gripping the chair tightly. I didn't feel triumphant. I only felt a profound sadness. But I knew I had done the right thing. I had protected my grandfather's legacy, and that was what mattered most. When Judge Margaret Collins announced that she would deliver her ruling the following month, I left the courtroom with mixed emotions. Nicole patted my shoulder, assuring me we had done our best and that our evidence was irrefutable. But deep down, victory was no longer what I craved. I just wanted justice, and above all, I wanted my grandfather to know I hadn't let him down. November arrived, bringing the biting chill of winter to Sacramento. The final hearing took place on a foggy morning, with weak sunlight filtering through the courtroom's large windows. I sat beside Nicole, clutching my grandfather's letter like a talisman. My family sat across from us, but they looked different this time. My mother no longer wore her expensive silk dresses, just a simple sweater. My father sat with slumped shoulders, his eyes weary. Luke's arrogant confidence was gone, replaced by visible tension on his face. Judge Collins entered, struck her gavel, and the courtroom fell silent. She looked around, her stern gaze resting on each of us. After thoroughly reviewing all evidence and testimony, she began, her voice resonant. "This court finds that the $3 million trust fund established by William Blake rightfully belongs to its sole beneficiary, Jacob Blake." My heart felt like it stopped. Nicole squeezed my hand lightly, but I didn't dare look at her. I kept my eyes on the judge, trying to stay calm as she continued. "Martin Blake, Janet Blake, and Luke Blake are ordered to repay the full $3 million, along with additional penalties for fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. Furthermore, James Carter, the attorney involved in the unauthorized transfer, will face an investigation and revocation of his law license." The courtroom was silent. I heard my mother sob, but I didn't look at her. I couldn't. The judge's gavel struck, ending the trial, but to me it was like a bell tolling the end of a chapter of my life. I stood, my legs trembling, and left the courtroom with Nicole. Outside, the frigid air made me shiver, but I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I had won. But the victory didn't bring the joy I once imagined. Nicole hugged me, her smile radiant. "You did it, Jacob," she said. "Your grandfather would be so proud." I nodded but said nothing. I knew she was right, but a heavy sadness lingered in my heart. I had reclaimed my grandfather's legacy, but at the cost of my family, the relationship I had once hoped, however faintly, to salvage. In the weeks that followed, I learned that my family had fallen into debt. The Miami mansion was foreclosed to cover their obligations. Luke's sports cars were auctioned off. The lavish trips, the extravagant parties, all were now just memories. My mother called me once, her voice trembling, begging for forgiveness. "Jacob, I didn't know things would go this far," she said. "I just wanted our family to have a better life." I listened but didn't respond right away. I wanted to forgive her truly, but the wound was too deep. "Mom," I finally said, "I only wanted what Grandpa left for me. I didn't want to destroy the family, but you all chose this path." I hung up, tears falling silently. I didn't know if I could ever forgive, but for now I just wanted to move forward. James Carter, as per the court's ruling, had his law license revoked. Local newspapers ran stories with headlines like, "Sacramento lawyer disbarred for trust fund fraud." Part of me felt satisfied that justice had been served, but a larger part felt empty. The money, the reputation, everything my family had chased after was gone. But I wasn't. I was still here, in the old house, with my grandfather's memories and his promise. When the $3 million was transferred to my account, I didn't feel the excitement I once expected. I sat in the old kitchen looking out at the weed-filled garden and thought about what my grandfather would want me to do. He had said money doesn't make a person, but it could help me live true to myself. I decided not to chase the glamour my family had pursued. I didn't want a mansion, a fancy car, or extravagant trips. I wanted a simple, sustainable life, just as my grandfather had taught me. I used part of the money to renovate the old house, replacing the roof, repainting the wooden walls, and turning the weedy garden into a small vegetable patch. I invested the rest in a savings fund and a few small projects, like opening a modest woodworking shop in Sacramento, where I could work with my hands as my grandfather once did. I didn't need to be rich. I just needed enough to live authentically. One winter evening, as light snow fell outside the window, I stood in the living room rehanging my grandfather's photo on the wall. The picture was old, but his eyes still shone with unwavering faith. I touched the frame, feeling a peace I hadn't known in years. "I protected your legacy, Grandpa," I whispered. "I did it." I sat on the sofa, opened a bottle of cheap wine, the kind my grandfather liked, and poured a glass. I looked out the window where snowflakes glimmered under the streetlights. The old house still creaked, still carried the familiar scent of pine. I no longer had a family in the conventional sense, but I had my grandfather. Not in person, but in his lessons, his letter, and the legacy he left behind. And for me, that was enough. I took a sip of wine, the slight bitterness lingering on my tongue. I thought about the lonely years, the times I was abandoned, the legal battle I'd just endured. It had all led me to this moment, a quiet, unflashy, but complete moment. I didn't need anyone's validation. I didn't need glamorous social media photos. I just needed to know I had lived up to what my grandfather believed in. Outside, the world kept turning. The press would eventually forget the lawsuit. My family would find ways to rebuild their lives. But I would stay here, in the old house, living a simple, honest life. And every time I looked at my grandfather's photo, I knew he was smiling.